real conversations, and some hard truths. Gangs, drugs, and guns. Giving a voice to those willing to sacrifice. We have stories that need to be told. We have lessons that need to be taught. Protect and serve. Welcome to The Quiet Professional. So welcome back to another episode in our podcast series about China. Nathan Romas with you, as well as our co-host for this series, Calvin Krusty, senior partner and consultant with the Critical Risk team. So welcome, Calvin. Our discussions continue with several experts regarding issues such as foreign influence, organized crime, money laundering, and hybrid warfare, just to name a few. Due to the growing influence on our nation from both outside actors and within, Calvin and I have put together this series to explore and better understand these issues. And before I introduce our guest, I'd like to clarify that when referencing China, we're talking about the Chinese Communist Party, or CCP, and their various means of influence and coercion. This is distinct from the good people of China, the majority of whom have contributed to the advancement and interests of Canada and other nations. And to discuss these matters, we have Sam Cooper with us. So Sam is an award-winning Canadian investigative journalist who has presented his findings to law enforcement agencies, legal and financial professionals, and academics internationally. Cooper graduated with a degree in history, philosophy, and English from the University of Toronto, and a certificate in journalism from Langara College, where he was awarded the Jack Webster Prize for Outstanding Student Journalist. So welcome, Sam.
Thank you both very much.
So maybe we'll kind of get into your history to start so people kind of know you. So can you kind of tell us about yourself, where you come from, and what got you into journalism?
So I grew up in the Greater Toronto area, and I eventually went to University of Toronto, where my interests were English and philosophy and history, which are good training for journalism. But at the time, I was thinking about law school. I dropped that plan, and after university, I was getting more interested in writing and journalism. I went to Japan first, so that was really a very interesting time and introduction to East Asian culture. I eventually returned to Canada, settling in Vancouver for journalism school. And then at that point, when I jumped into community news first and eventually up to the province and the Sun, my area of focus, I just found I was immersed like everyone in Vancouver in what the heck is going on with the housing market there and all these supercars racing around town. It was just the levels of wealth you cannot ignore. And yet, I didn't, in my professional circles, I didn't see too many people that could, afford the housing market. So, to jump to the chase there, I jumped into discovering how funds from offshore really were in very complex ways making their way into Vancouver's housing market, and that led me to Hong Kong, Macau, and mainland China, and eventually discovering underground banking. So, in a nutshell, that's not the only thing by far I've reported on. I've reported on lots of social issues, lots of politics, but it certainly has become an area of focus, sort of looking at corruption, political influence, mainly from, I would say my interests are mostly regimes that are very hostile to Canada, and how Canada seems to not have good defenses or even understanding for the most part into how other countries are leveraging a lot of our institutions against us. So that, in a nutshell, is what I'm up to.
Well, and you know what? The title of your book, Willful, Blindness, I thought was very appropriate, especially being in the industry that, or the job profession that I'm in. Do you think, is from what you've seen and the investigating that you've done, would you say that willful blindness is kind of one of our greatest failures? Or are we just really susceptible, maybe weak to temptations of money and different vices? Because from my experience, I would say willful blindness probably plays the biggest part. You see a lot of people don't act on things that they should. either things are just too difficult, or they think, I don't think that'll be have an effect on me or somebody that I care about. So what have you kind of seen throughout, your time in journalism?
Yeah, that's a great, that kind of taps into my philosophical course training, because we can apply willful blindness to, as you say, to all areas of our lives. But when we're talking about provincial and national governments, my focus was, I took the quote willful blindness directly from a source that, for his own reasons, he was a BC Lottery Corporation investigator in anti-money laundering, and there were very complex, let's just call them rationalizations and arguments for why the funds that I started to look at, both in real estate and then after real estate, casinos and underground banking coming into BC, there was just across the board at the political level, at the business leader level, a real, quote, willful accusations of willful blindness to where this money was coming from. And so, I'll just say that that person's name is Ross Alderson. He was a former officer in Australia and came over to Canada, has now returned to Australia. I'm just going to say essentially chased out of Canada as a whistleblower who, in his complex work environment, tried to do something to sound the alarm. But yeah, willful blindness, my course of discovery has been, it started with the casinos, and a lot of people, and maybe Calvin will chime in, but I believe a lot of people in the RCMP who understood through their looking at transnational drug trafficking, money laundering networks, that there was no denying that just a huge amount of the revenue coming into BC government casinos was attributed to mainland China and to known drug trafficking targets that had been known drug trafficking targets for years in British Columbia. And yet the government was allegedly, and I'm asserting, willfully blind to the evidence that police knew of. And so that, I believe, I won't ramble forever on this question, but my frame of analysis is that not only in BC casinos, but in political funding and networks in Canada, in banking, in real estate development, that same willful blindness to funds flowing in from not just China, but of course, Russia, Iran, Saudi Arabia, other areas into Canada's economy. For some reason, all industrial nations have this problem. But I and others, and I think Calvin, do believe that Canada has a system in place that is very permissive of these funds. And you have to start, the investigator's mind has to start asking, these are smart people at the top of Canada's government. So why do these loopholes still exist? Is it willful blindness?
Yeah. And Calvin, you want to go on that?
Yeah, I'll just say that my experience with, from Sam's comments relative to a general sense of when the issues are too complex, or if they touch upon, say, some conflicting interest, i.e., in this particular case, the revenue generation to a BC government, there seems to be I'd almost call it a cultural sense. I wish I wouldn't say that, but I think Canada suffers from a cultural sense of a little bit of risk aversion, not wanting to get into the conflict of it, but also maybe accepting a high degree of naivety and displacement of responsibility to others, rather than assuming, this is our country, let's do something about it, which is my experience working with other countries, seem a little more take ownership and accountability, in terms of not only just the police, but the public generally speaking. And I think, what Sam's describing, I found in, sadly, the some elements of the police, but on the flip side of it, there was others that were enraged by it. But there was also a degree, particularly at the political levels, of either dismissal
Mm-hmm.
of it or non-acceptance of it, because it was almost something that seemed a little surreal, and there was some cognitive dissonance things going. How could, in our beautiful country, in our beautiful city of Vancouver, could we be seeing, hundreds of millions of dollars funneling through government institutions from profits of fentanyl, which is killing our youth and mentally vulnerable, generated by Triads and other transnational organized crime networks.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like it's almost too difficult to presume. And I think then you add the Ottawa factor in there, which they've got beautiful, Rideau Canal for skating and beautiful walks along the canal in the summertime. I think it's just almost unimaginable for the decision makers in Canada to understand that there's these real threats out here. So I agree with Sam, and Sam, I ask you this question. I know you have some really unique relationships, not only nationally but internationally, with police and others, and that. And I just wondered if you can kind of comment in terms of your work relative to some of those other interactions you've had with some pretty impressive security, intelligence, and police officers, in terms of a comparative analysis. If this is something unique to Vancouver, if it's unique to Canada, or if it's a broader issue than, say, just the willful blindness of government and security forces in the Vancouver area, if it's broader than that.
Yeah, I would agree with you very much. I think there's some very smart and very savvy people in Canada that know exactly what's going on. And unfortunately, month by month and year by year, I start to get my eyes on documents that would point to powerful people and say not only do they know what's going on, but unfortunately, they could be co-opted, compromised, or corrupted. I'll add another C, and this could be coercive to Canada's democracy, right? And so, but having said that, that is not everyone. There is, I'm afraid, a lot of naivety. I've expressed and even, used in my narrative in my book that, we grow up as Canadians just believing that we're such a solid and do-gooding country, but that reputation, unfortunately, I don't believe is held in other of our, allies, the capitals, in Washington, Canberra, or London anymore. What, is Canada starting to slip or on the verge of being not a respected or even, a real member of the Five Eyes? That's a real danger. I'm not, just guessing at that. I'm hearing from people in the intelligence communities. And the lack of what you said about pushing away sort of accountability. Sure, look, if we really want to look at deep into our Canadian DNA as a country and say, do we rely too much on our powerful allies that they go out and do some good work and also do some tough work in the world and take blowback because of it? And do we kind of shy away from that and yet reap the benefits of those partnerships? The more and more I look at this from a geopolitical level and talk to people like you and the people you mentioned in other capitals, yes, they see it that way. And I think we need to start seeing that way. And that applies, I'm not an expert on military at this point, but it applies to a lot of things in Canada. I do think that, again, that naivety or the willful sort of focusing on our laurels of the past or just our conception of ourselves. Now I feel like I'm getting back into philosophy, Cal, but I agree with you, Cal.
Would, and kind of on that point, this is someone I was going to bring up more in like a current event situation, but I'll get to it now. With the U.S. kind of getting in some hot water with allies when like Edward Snowden showed that the U.S. is spying even on their friends. If we're considered a weak link in the Five Eyes or in geopolitics in general, would it not kind of serve to, serve maybe a greater purpose that the US is looking into us because maybe we are a weak link as Canada when it comes to intelligence or government. Maybe they need to kind of do these things to protect themselves, but also, I mean, if we're relying on them and they got to protect us to some degree, can we really get mad at them for such a thing? And maybe it's just me being a giant nerd, but I think it's kind of like Batman when he's spying on all the other superheroes, and then they all get mad at him, and he's like, "But you none of you know what's going on."
Well, yeah, with that great power, there's great responsibility, and I mean, just to zero in on the factors, like let's look at what's happening in the Arctic, and at some point, if Canada doesn't pay more attention both to what China and Russia are attempting to do up there, in multiple frames, and beef up our security and intelligence capacities, and our military and really economy, then what's going to happen? In a way, we do lose some sovereignty to good allies who are just saying, okay, we're going to have to shoulder that, and okay, Canada, can you up what you're doing, or are you just going to sit there like some of the, let's just say, some of the elites that are always looking at down their noses at what the US does in the world? And I'm not saying that they don't get into some trouble and do some very, some tough things, but I'm agreeing with what you said. It's like, can we get mad at them for getting into hot water when we won't even go near the hot water?
Yeah. So I want to go a bit back to your book here, because a lot of the stuff in there I found relates to the ground level of work. So police on front lines, what they might be able to look for, and just how all of this is interconnected, right from a person using drugs right on the street all the way up through the highest levels of the Triads and the CCP. And you do this a few times in your book where you kind of flesh out a whole story, and then you explain, well, hey, this is how this scheme works. Can you kind of walk us through maybe just a version of how drugs on the street are ultimately tied back through the drug dealer to funneling money to a casino, which is then washed further on? Can you kind of explain one of those processes that you mentioned in your book?
Yeah, this can become a fascination, an obsession for people that study this, and analysts. And so sometimes I'll explain and keep it simple, and some I'll go off on a tangent. But a simple flow is, we need to understand, the great driver in BC's economy for dirty money is the factor that mainland China has a capital export bar as a communist country of about 50,000 US per year on the vast majority of its citizens. And so their great wealth has been created in China in the past decades as it interfaced with global economies. And so for corrupt reasons, and also for strategic reasons, there's many actors in China that use underground or criminal methods to export their money into other economies. And Vancouver has been, the focus, a disproportionate, incredible focus of a lot of those funds. We're talking about, estimates are over $1 trillion, in the past decades, escaping China underground. And so, okay, we need to understand the Macau casino model. Macau, just off the coast of mainland China, is a gambling legal zone. You cannot gamble in China. And so these either criminal or corrupt officials who, as I've written, in some cases are one and the same, can run money out of China through these triad junkets, which are really just, criminal businesses with sometimes legal faces, where you make an arrangement to go to Macau and take out a loan from a gangster to gamble at the casino, and then you cash out and you've got your money out of China in a clever way. So how does that relate to Vancouver? That model, which ties directly into Hong Kong business networks at a high level as well, was exported, whole hog, completely complete copy into Vancouver, mainly through diaspora networks who were, setting up underground banks and Triad, quasi junket operations in Vancouver and offering the same service. So how does that relate to heroin or fentanyl or cocaine? Well, let's take fentanyl. As we know that most of the precursors are produced in factories in China. So we can have, let's just say, a transnational drug dealer, boss, or a high-level official, or just an average business person who's involved in those networks, comes to Vancouver, takes out a loan from a fentanyl trafficker who's dealing, fentanyl pills that are ultimately sourced from those chemicals in mainland China. The fentanyl trafficker is also an underground banker and loan shark, or his friends are. He lends out the money to that official or that drug boss or business person who has traveled into Vancouver to gamble in the casinos. And then that person, again, they've got money out of China. How do they do it? By it's simply the proceeds of fentanyl sales, ultimately derived from China, that are loaned to that person. And he gambles, and win or lose, he's going to win sometimes, lose sometimes. But he will repay that drug cash loan. Again, warehouses of drug cash in Vancouver, as you guys know. And he will repay that drug cash loan with his own funds in a bank account in China that zip right into a drug trafficker's bank account. There's probably, let's just say there's bankers everywhere that are turning a blind eye to this. Mm-hmm. And then those funds in the drug trafficker's account goes back to the fentanyl factory, produces more precursors, which are shipped to Vancouver, and the cycle continues. So I'll stop there. It gets a lot more complex where we've got like car imports and exports and, car warehouses and shipping containers in Vancouver, which can be tied also to fentanyl precursors and sort of arbitrage of cars from North America shipped over to China. But that's the next book. You can see that, it can be, it gets very complex, but the general transaction flow of the economy in China feeding into Canada and illegal proceeds going back there. That's it.
Well, I think your next book maybe should come to Edmonton and write about some of the people here. Let's start something. We actually there was an investigation 2 years ago, maybe it was now, but they had people stealing high-end cars, putting them on into trains, and they were getting shipped out somewhere. Presumably, they're ultimately end up overseas. So that is a huge business. Our casinos aren't the greatest here. They're not like big to-dos, but I imagine there's some stuff going on in them too. So, Calvin, you want to go ahead?
Well, I was just going to say, I think if we went to the open source area, you would see that there's the periodic cars driving from Calgary, Edmonton, back to Vancouver with suitcases of money periodically on open source. Mm-hmm. So you'd be able to see that. Sam, I was going to ask. You deal with a lot of security and intelligence folks in this space, and I I just wonder what the general sentiment is in terms of the people that you're talking to. I mean, obviously, the insight that some of them have is fairly significant. And I just wonder what's the general level of concern they have for what's taking place, both on the street and the higher level. When you're talking to people from the intelligence world, policing world, and other areas.
That's a great question. I'll focus on the intelligence. I think I started more with casino investigators and police, and because the file is international, I got into the intelligence implications. And so my sense from intelligence is they had read my book, and this was very influential. Even within CSIS, some of the findings and just the concrete, dot connecting and the conclusions and the assessments And so in some ways, I believe that, we know the history that CSIS was going down the road of making these connections where the transnational crime networks are seen as national security threats with direct connections to the Chinese Communist Party. And of course, we know that, it's the exact same sort of model employed by Russia and Iran, where intelligence agencies and organized crime actors and officials are often, the very same networks. And they're used strategically. It's called strategic corruption, in ways to get money, move money around the world to fulfill at the end of the day, the objectives of the state. And so my sense is that the reason I've been getting some extremely sensitive intelligence that's starting to rock the boat politically in Canada is that, again, Canadian intelligence, people are fearful that I can't get away from this point. Again, people are fearful that the Five Eyes is not a guarantee. Canada could be facing such threats from countries, including China and Russia, to our political system, that we're losing the trust of our allies. And so it's all about national security. And that's why people would take, the risks to provide information to a reporter that they believe has really studied this, and for the most part is really getting it and is making their own findings, similar to what, people in intelligence and policing world, the investigative methods they use. So my point is, I'm getting information and vetting it very carefully through journalistic methods to inform Canadians, and that informs the political discourse and debate. And I think that's why, let's just circle back to Ross Alderson, who was in financial intelligence. He himself said a number of times, I went to you because of what you were pointing to. I knew it was true, and also you were putting together things that taught me something as well. So, yeah, that's Canada's perspective, and I can add that increasingly I'm hearing from people in Washington that again are following the reporting here, and sort of the general takeaway is, wow, this is. We knew it was bad. Some of us know it's worse than you're onto yet. Others, you're showing us something. But why is Canada in this position of not doing anything with these threats, where Australia, a very similar country in some ways, has done so much and been a leader in countering these threats? So that's the perspectives from outside Canada in intelligence and enforcement that I'm hearing.
Yeah, and worth mentioning, Sam, I think that you and I actually did a talk at the Pentagon at that. I mean, this is how serious it is. Is it kind of whispering conversations over cappuccinos or a scotch? It's actually formal presentations from Canadians in Washington talking about the failures of policing, really, in many regards, in terms of not doing this. And when I say that, it sounds very high level, but when we take a look at it, we're talking really about, the deaths of thousands of mentally vulnerable kids through fentanyl, the indigenous communities, and others. And people are paying attention to it in the US and other places where we seem to kind of be sweeping it under the carpet. And I think it's fair to say, I think there's like a sense from our partners at times that our leadership culture, and I keep going back to culture rather than pointing fingers at people, that we kind of have like a, British Chamberlain type mentality in terms of leadership, from the pre-World War II, dealing with threats and issues, where, really nice, soft, fuzzy approach. When really a Churchill type mentality of accepting the fact that we're kind of in a battle space right now, and we need to be a little more robust, forward thinking, and risk adverse in terms of leadership, both at the political level and I think at the security and intelligence and policing level. And really, the general culture of our leadership is Chamberlain, not Churchill at this time. Mm-hmm. And I asked this question on the heels of that. One is, the connectivity that you've seen, and you've probably got just as good as most policing and intelligence ones because of the work that you've done and some of the people that you're talking about. The interconnectivity between fentanyl deaths, and the CCP. Can you describe your analysis and thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, that's a great question, and I'm asked it a lot because in the book, I quoted a very important source for my investigations, that a source that helped me understand how a People's Liberation Army veteran in a compound located in British Columbia appeared to have, Chapo Guzman type wealth in BC, and what kind of business activity was feeding that wealth. This person was a central, powerful, prominent, feared figure in communities across Canada, directly related to the casino investigations in Vancouver. There were lots of indications of political connectivity, that could go into Beijing networks. And so what was this person doing here? So this source that helped me understand that person first kind of made the comment that the fentanyl coming into BC, this is like the reverse opium war. So the idea being that, as we know, British colonialism made some really bad and choices that benefited them, and flooded southern China with opium, and lots of people were profiting, lots of corruption. But eventually, China moved against that. And some people in police and intelligence believe that not only is there an element of, well, now we're wearing the pith helmets in Beijing, and we're free to mix legitimate global trade with drug, precursor shipments, and profit in many ways, and not cut off that supply when the US is asking us to do something. So not only is there kind of, it's our turn now, but could there be the complicity and even the connectedness that powerful Chinese Communist Party officials are known to give protection to transnational drug traffickers, are known to task transnational gangsters to interfere in other societies, and I understand are known to even direct and handle powerful gangsters working abroad. So I believe that the case is proven that the Chinese Communist Party is complicit in those international drug trafficking activities involving fentanyl proceeds. And do I have the document that certain officials are directing loads into Vancouver or Sinaloa or other areas? I don't have that, but I can say again that certainly almost every in the know police and intelligence official who understands the CCP file and the fentanyl file says not only are they complicit, they want this trade to be occurring around the world. That's the best way I could put it.
And our neighbors to the south, and some of which we view and monitor, both of us, former senior executives from DA and others are very vocal about this fact, and have extreme concerns about it. And again, I just go back, as a Canadian, I'm somewhat perplexed based on my experience, that there seems to be kind of a dismissal of it. And on that dismissal thing, one last question I'd like to make sure that gets covered is a lot of these issues were uncovered by your writings and your work. And there's some others that did it, but you really highlighted the what I could refer to as the Great Barrier Reef of Canada, i.e. Vancouver, everything that looks pretty, but everything that you touch is dangerous and deadly. And you uncovered that. And as a result of that, I think you probably were one of the primary precipitators for what we know as the Cullen Commission on money laundering relative to the government. And then there was a year-long process of a public inquiry with lawyers and politicians, government officials, police managers, intelligence people, gaming experts, all that were in there, and actually global experts on this stuff. And that took place over a year. Was in the paper every day. You watched some of that, and based on what you know in terms of what that problem was and what you see, how congruent and effective do you think that inquiry was in terms of educating Canadians on the threat and dealing with the issues?
Yeah, I've made the argument in the updated version of my book in the last chapter that the commission, I do believe, had a lot of value in confirming for the public that as the Justice Austin Cullen or the commissioner said, we can say that very sophisticated criminal networks are having the effect of tearing at the fabric of our society. The money laundering is a vast problem. Cullen said they couldn't, put a figure on it, but facts came out of the commission that I had, I had some idea of the scale, but when I came away from the commission, my idea of the scale of suspected criminal proceeds washing through BC government casinos just expanded, I would say almost exponentially. To my estimations, I estimated something like 2 billion would be washed through BC casinos going back to around 2009 up to 2018. And it's a lot higher than that after some data points that I read in the Cullen Commission that I just won't recount right now. Everyone can go in there and study the report themselves, which seems to be almost forgotten by now, by the way. But maybe it's forgotten because there's a feeling that while Cullen said, essentially, Sam Cooper and others' reports were right, there's a massive problem, money laundering was occurring, there was something like a turning of a blind eye, even though in BC's political establishment, even though Cullen wouldn't come out and say that, the respected Commissioner Cullen, I think a lot of people, myself included, that watched it very closely were very disappointed that the commission did not look at the elite's highest level sort of transnational crime networks and suspects and how they, as I've written, interconnected with Chinese state interests. At the end of the day, we can't get away from that because the flow coming into BC, I'm asserting, is underwritten by the Chinese state. And so BC, Canada will be able to do very little about it unless they understand that. And if Canada understands that fact, then the types of countermeasures and legal amendments needed will be put in place. The other point is, for a concrete example, as I write in the book, we're talking about tycoons from Hong Kong. Some of them are not with us anymore. Some are around 90 or more, but they had direct connectivity to the Chinese Communist Party and the highest level of triads. Canada's government, some in Canada's police and intelligence knew and alleged this for decades, but the Cullen report didn't touch on that at all. And furthermore, I know that there was people, not even pointing to you, I know there's people that were there in those Hong Kong investigations that were ready to testify about those highest level, or what I call upstream issues. And the Cullen lawyers, very smart people, never led that evidence. And I question why. So I could go on about that. Just to summarize, I think there's some good recommendations, like the new Premier David Eby is moving forward on wealth explanation orders. Mm-hmm. But the level of legal amendment needed to really counter these flows is just way beyond anything that was suggested in the Cullen report, I believe.
Yeah, I would just add, I would echo that the issues of, and I think any of Nathan's listeners would appreciate this, is that the dismissal of the issues of disclosure and charter issues that are incongruent for allowing and facilitating international collaboration amongst police and even domestic police operations, and that almost preclude, almost exclusively, I would say, being able to tackle any of this stuff, i.e., being able to go after any of the higher level people. Like it's almost that the legal system provides, sadly, and I'm listening to myself talk, and it kind of sounds a little demoralizing, but it basically licenses the top tier players to continue going, and it was something that was, as you alluded to, dismissed, ignored, and not really discussed. Which I think, well, I give credit to Mr. Eby, like you do, as well, for the initiative. I think anybody that's a policeman, whether they're a constable on an investigative unit or former manager like myself on it, I don't see much changing unless that changes, and all the other changes, more money, more policing, all the other stuff really won't make a huge difference until there's that legislative reform taken seriously. But Nathan, you had something?
Yeah, I was just going to kind of jump in there too, and to, I guess, a few points that both of you have made. I would say that what I think a lot of people need to realize too is the criminal side of things has been almost weaponized by the criminals. They know all the ins and outs. They've got all the money to drown things out in court, drag things, and then all of a sudden, things are getting tossed out, like super serious crimes are getting tossed out. And that's why you see a lot of the provinces are now kind of trying to use provincial legislation to go after things such as civil forfeiture, for an example. So there's other ways that even within our own unit, I know we try to do things through a provincial lens if we can, to avoid going through the criminal side, because you just never know what you're going to get when it gets into a courtroom. The laws, I find right now, with a lot of the media reporting out there, and there's, I don't know if we want to call it conspiracy theory, but a lot of the concern of government overreach into people's lives. But when you look at who writes these reports, and this is a question I was going to get to with Sam, was the effect on media. But when you look into who writes some of these articles and the background of those people, or the lawyers that are involved in some of these investigations, and you look at who they're connected to, there's some very shady stuff going on, and they're getting all the airtime, right? So they're putting out articles saying the government's just trying to take every normal person's money, trying to take all their cars and their homes. When that is not the case. The government doesn't, like, at least I know in our service, we don't got the money to spy on people. So when people get concerned about that, it's like, well, where are these narratives coming from? And that was going to be one of the things I was going to ask Sam about, just kind of his opinion on maybe the weaponizing of media. And, you might see, for example, if you start reporting on China, well, maybe they won't call you out directly, but they'll have some articles go out saying that, there's a lot of anti-Asian rhetoric out there, or maybe they do just outright will call you or somebody racist. But do you kind of see that effect on media? Do you see people kind of, in one respect, afraid to write about the truth? And then I guess, and part of that question is, do you see the influence of these, we'll say, bad actors on media?
Yeah, that's a great question. So tackle it in a couple parts. First of all, as journalists, rightly, we have the training that we need to be looking into government overreach and, some of the best stories ever, thinking about, let's say, Watergate or things of this nature, is when the government is the bad guys. So that's our training. We need to be watching for that, the overreach of the state. And so that's good. But in Canada, when you have a system, when, at least from my point of view, when you understand that, as you say, with regards to powerful crime networks, Canada is actually very underpowered and underlawed in comparison to our other, allies and democracies. So this is something I think that journalists should consider. And certainly, we can see from my reports that a lot of people are quoted, such as Calvin sometimes or others, that say there's no such thing as a money laundering or drug trafficking offense without a charter argument. And I've heard that directly from a veteran BC Crown prosecutor. Everyone knows that's the case. So is there a problem there in terms of, is there any influence on some of these stories? Sure. I can just say, as everyone in Western Canada knows, maybe across Canada, perhaps the best, crime reporter in recent memory or Canadian history is Kim Bolan, my former colleague at the Vancouver Sun, who has such deep networks and such great reporting. And I just remember, I happened to be when I was at the province and she was at the Sun. I forget if we were covering the same trial, but a lawyer for, a very, let's just say a very powerful Fraser Valley, people that know Vancouver will know where that is and how was deep in the drug trade and, still is, but in around 2009, 10, 11, massive street gang wars, just rocking Metro Vancouver. I happened to be in the cafeteria taking a break from a trial, and I heard a very well-connected lawyer talking with his junior associate while they were waiting for their soup. And they said something, well, can we get someone like Kim Bolan to write about this? And, I won't go further. Of course, they can never get Kim Bolan to write about that. But that just shows you, and I know that lawyers that are deeply tied into this stuff do look to reach out to and influence people. I can say that because I just happened as a cub reporter to go, okay, I'm just going to bump up against these guys at their table and ask them a little question. And the person then went on to suggest to me that he had a case of how, habeas corpus was being abused against one of his clients in the Fraser Valley jail. So that does happen. And, jumping to the state's counter narratives against, myself and others that do some real digging into this foreign interference activity. Sure, I write in the book that I write in the updated edition of my book, Willful, Blindness, that after the book came out, I was alerted. It wasn't a duty to warn or anything like that, but I was alerted by Canadian intelligence that very specific Chinese intelligence collection tasking had been activated with regards to myself, and people were asked to see if they could discover my government sourcing, whether I was receiving support from any of the so-called Chinese Communist Party five poisons. These would be Falun Gong and the interests of democracy, etc. And so I won't go through the whole laundry list of what they're trying to find on me, but I was told, if you had ever wanted to travel to China and Hong Kong, and I did, you should not go there anymore. You need to take, these precautions. And furthermore, certainly very recent examples, your listeners can just go Google something called Found in Translation. It's a new Substack put out by a anonymous Mandarin language researcher that shows how, shortly after some of my reporting on CCP, United Front Work Department, political interference networks, websites or business leaders or community leaders that are implicated in the intelligence that I have reported on very quickly after will come out with stories, accusing or pointing towards me. And I could go on to, talk about people in the political realm that might, or even in the media space, and not just Mandarin language media that Chinese consulate officials may be, trying to activate, but maybe that's a future conversation. I think it is true that they're in media, the danger of manipulation from both criminal, legal, and state actors is not just something I'm observing from my experience. It's something that I have eyes on, intelligence documentation, and probably here's a tip. This is something I may look more into myself in the future.
Mm-hmm. Calvin, did you have something there?
Yeah. Yeah, I'll just kind of make a comment, knowing the time's winding down and respecting that. More of a comment than the question, and then I'll turn it over to you, Nathan. I think having spent 33 years in policing and the last portion of it, dealing with many of these issues that Sam's talking about in terms of transnational organized crime, money laundering, foreign threat actors, that possibly state facilitated or supported. The experience, that Sam communicated in his book in terms of Willful, Blindness does transcend into, not only government, but I would say it cascades into some of the leadership, and I kind of alluded to that. We have a lot of Chamberlains versus Churchills currently in terms of the mentality. And I hope that changes, with more awareness. And I think that awareness is what I kind of wanted to end up on, Sam, is we had our associate Nick McKenzie on the podcast recording the other day, which will come out. And we talked at the end of it about the importance in terms of talking about that relationship between police and media, which is quite often strained at times. But what I've learned and what I've experienced, in terms of the interactivity with yourself and Nick and others, and my experience working over in Europe this last summer and working with some intelligence entities and investigative journalists and others, is the importance to, more than ever, to work with investigative journalists like yourself, where we share the same values for most parts, in terms of your enemy is our enemy, which makes us friends. And I said that to Nick yesterday. And I just really encourage, any of the listeners, to not, obviously they have to respect those legal parameters in terms of not sharing sensitive information. But that doesn't preclude having more generalized conversations and exploring ways that they can help the media, and the media can help the police put a spotlight on these issues. Because I think with the current legal framework we have, probably the media is probably doing just as effective, if not even more of an effective job in terms of mitigating this threat to Canadians. And I just wanted to end saying thanks very much for your service, particularly exposing yourself and others in your network to risk. And I'll just wanted to say thanks. And I really feel our friendship, a degree of honor in terms of having you on the podcast today, and obviously having a friendship with you. So I'll turn it over to Nathan for his comments.
Yeah, Sam, I know we're right to the wire here. How can people best follow your work? So the book Willful Blindness is out there. Any other platforms to follow you?
Yeah, you can just follow me on Twitter at Scooper Cooper, and I'm reporting in the National Investigations Unit at Global News. And to what Calvin said, yeah, there can be so much from journalists that understand that police and intelligence is just part of Canadian society, or these other countries you talked about, Nick, in Australia. And there are times when the media has to do our part to hold the government and police and intelligence to account. Certainly, there can be abuses, but by us doing those stories, and also doing the stories though where we need to support Canadian society through laws and support of police and intelligence, that balance is there, and that's the relationship that I think that a mature level of reporting calls for.
Great. Well, it's great to meet you. And we'll definitely have to talk in the future. So thank you for being on and part of the whole series. And we'll look to have you back.
Thank you both very much.
Take care.